questions as to what I want you to write your papers on. The reality is, I don't care what you write your papers on as long as it has something to do with human development. It can be about babies, it can be about toddlers, it can be about adults, it can be about human sexual response. It really doesn't matter to me. As long as it's something that you're interested in, if it's going to be easier for you to write your paper if it's something you're interested in, as long as you're interested in it and as long as it's in the textbook. Writing about uh, fleas in the 21st century probably doesn't really fit in the development concept. So all I want you to do is write a paper about something that you're interested in that has to do with something about development. I hope that straightens everything out. It means you can write it on just about anything because human development covers just about everything that have to do with humans. So why don't we go ahead and get started with this chapter 9, Emerging Adulthood. We are actually going to be talking about human sexual response today to some extent. I don't really remember if there are any pictures, any nudity in today's lecture. I'm guessing there isn't, but you never know. Sometimes I will throw those in there just to keep people awake. Okay, so today we're going to talk about emerging adulthood. There are 5 distinctive characteristics of emerging adulthood. The age of identity explorations, exploring various possibilities of work and love. Age of instability, exploration leads to instability, wondering what you're going to do. Some of you have probably gone through this, and that's one of the reasons why you've gone back to school or gone to school. This is what you want to do for the future, you think. A lot of people will change. When I was young, I wanted to teach. Right out of college, I got a teaching license, and of course, Vietnam was going on at the time, and so I was induced to go into the military. And when I was in the military, they made me a medic. One of the things I wanted to do was to be a weatherman, but that didn't work out. So then I became a medic, but instead of just being a medic, I became a laboratory technician, which, as it turned out, had a longer training period than pilot training, as strange as that may seem. It was like a year and 2 months long. So I was really happy. I was learning a lot of things. I learned a lot of medicine. I worked in medicine for 30 years and picking up teaching from time to time. I decided to go into psychology after taking a business class and finding it the most boring class I'd ever taken. Don't tell Patrick Blackwater what I said, but oh my God, how can anybody study business? My goodness, it's so boring. Anyway, so I changed careers right in the middle of being a working in medicine. I enjoyed medicine, and I would go back to it. I have gone back to it from time to time. In my last, while I've been teaching, every once in a while I'll go back to it, draw blood or work in a clinic or do whatever needs to be done. But so you can see, my life has been just as unstable as anyone else's. Self-focused age, learning to be more self-sufficient before committing to someone else. I was married at 19, so there I didn't have a very long self-sufficient phase. Um, I, I started college when I was 17, and I finished when I was 21. And by the time I was 21, I already had 2 children. So my life has been one of I don't know. It's I've always been paired up with somebody, I guess. Like I said, I was married at 19. We had kids right away, so And even when my first wife left, I still had two kids. I was able to secure the two children. She ran off, and so I was able to take care of them. So I've always been paired up with somebody, and eventually, of course, my children grew up, and by that time I was remarried. So yeah, it's the self-focused age. When I was focusing on myself, I really didn't have a self-focused age. Age of feeling in between, feeling of being in transition, that was while I was in college. And age of possibilities, potential for dramatic changes. And my changes, well, Vietnam was pretty dramatic, I guess. Explore various possibilities of work and love. In the 1960s, the median age of marriage in most developed countries was in the low 20s. And as I told you before, I was married at 19. Most of the people that I graduated from high school with got married right out of high school. Many of them didn't go to college, they went right into the factory and got married, and usually before they retired, they had divorced one person and had married somebody else. In the 1960s, the average age of women getting married was 21, and the average age of for men was 23. In the United States today, the average age of marriage is 27. So as you can see, it's very much different than it was once upon a time. In all other countries, developed countries, the average age of marriage is 30. So if you go to England or you go to France or Germany or Japan, the average age is for marriage is 30. Average age of marriage today is 27. By the time I was 27, I had already been married 3 times. This delay in marriage is due to 4 revolutionary changes. The delay in marriage in the United States and in developing countries: technology revolution, the sexual revolution, the women's movement, and the youth movement changed, have been revolutionary changes. As emerging adults explore different possibilities in love and work, the rest of their life tends to be in flux as well. They tend to move from one residence to the other, seeking to find where they belong. They move out of their parents' abode for the first time, and they taste freedom. And that usually happens in my children's case. That was when they went away to college. They moved out of the house and they moved into dormitories mostly. As far as my son was concerned, he kind of bounced around. He bounced around from one college to the next. He started out at Purdue, then he went to Nebraska Wesley, and then he went to Midland in Nebraska. And he just kind of went from one friend to the other. People would let him move in with them. Then he decided that he wanted to be a Bart. Actually, he decided he wanted to be an actor and a model. So he went to New York City, moved in with friends, and eventually, of course, well, not of course, eventually he moved from New York City to Los Angeles to be in the movies, which never actually happened. He was in a couple movies, but not that. He certainly wasn't a known actor. I worked as a bartender, and he was in California for 10 years, didn't strike it rich or make it big, so he went to chef school and became a chef, started moving around the country, working in kitchens, found out that he didn't like it, so we went back to bartending. Eventually, he finished his education and got a teaching license and started teaching down in Florida. Now he's working for one of our security agencies in Washington D.C., keeping us all from. Well, he works in cybersecurity, so he's keeping the Russians from breaking into your email accounts or whatever. And that's my son. My daughter was very much different than my son. My daughter has always finished everything that she started. My son starts a lot of things and doesn't finish them. But my daughter finished her bachelor's degree when she was 22. finished her master's degree at 24 and started working as what was she, an exercise physiologist. And she worked for the Air Force for a while, then she went into teaching. And she's been teaching ever since. So she is a little bit different than my son. The rate of residential change in the United States, as you can see, when people are in their 20s, the percent of them that move is 33%, I guess. As they get older, they become more stable. Of course, here I am. I'm right here. I'm 72 years old, and I've been living in the same house for. My wife and I figured this out the other day. Did we come here? 2011 we came here, so we've been here for 11 years. 20-somethings may move to college after graduation, in with a romantic partner around the country or the world to study or work. Almost half of American emerging adults move back in with their parents at least once before they find permanent residence. This is true of my son, but it was not true of my daughter. When my wife went to, where did she go? She went to Korea. It's an isolated tour, so I couldn't go with her. And we were living in right outside of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in Choctaw. And all of a sudden, my son decides he wants to move back. Well, I think what happened was the three of them got together. My daughter, my son, and my wife got together and decided that since I'd never been alone before, that somebody needed to move in with me, and that's when my son moved in. It's kind of interesting. Like I can't take care of myself. Anyway, my son moved in for a year. And then we got another assignment to Japan. So my wife and I moved to Japan, and he stayed in Oklahoma City for about 2 years, I guess. And then where did he go? He went to California. That's when he moved to California. Emerging adulthood is a time when the individuals shift from reliance on their parents to their own life. These individuals must focus on themselves to develop the self-reliance to make this traumatic break from their old selves to their new selves. Now, this may not be as true on the Navajo Nation as it is in the United States in general. Mostly, this is the way it works in Chicago and Los Angeles and in the rural areas of Iowa and Illinois and Indiana. But this may not be true on the reservations. Individuals of this age are developing decision-making skills, knowledge, and self-understanding. Individuals of this age tend to be less egocentric than adolescents, but they are seeking self-sufficiency. Often these emerging adults feel like they are stuck in between, no longer an adolescent, but not quite an adult. Research indicates that these individuals often don't feel like adults until they are in their late 20s. Often they feel like they are approaching adulthood, but haven't quite gotten there yet. Research shows that it isn't only emerging adults in the United States that feel that they are in between. This is also true in Argentina. And this is just the places that they've done these studies. In Argentina, Israel, the Czech Republic, China, and Austria. And I guess if you're in your 20s and you still have braces on your teeth to give you a pretty smile, I guess you probably wouldn't feel very much like an adult. Emerging adults live in a world of expanding possibilities. A few of their dreams have been tested. Research shows that 89% believe that they will fulfill their dreams someday. If there is a problem in their life, such as a negative family life, this is the time when they're on their own and can move beyond their past. And hopefully that is what happens. They move beyond their past. In the 1950s, manufacturing in the United States was based on hard commodities, but since then, manufacturing has changed to that of a service economy. Because of the increased need for knowledge of technology, education has been extended past high school. This is known as tertiary education. So what you're going through right now would be considered tertiary education. So elementary school and part of junior high is primary, is the primary grades. Then there's secondary education that goes through high school, and then it's tertiary education. Most people are delaying marriage thoughts or plans until they are done with their education. Thus, they are delaying marriage into their late 20s. And this is really kind of interesting. My son um, got engaged about a decade ago to a young lady, and they didn't want to get married until he had finished his education. He finished his bachelor's degree and decided that he wanted to go into cybersecurity. So he decided he needed a degree in advanced mathematics. Got his master's degree in advanced mathematics. Then he realized that he really couldn't get a job unless he had some computer behind him. So he got a master's degree in systems analysis, computer systems analysis. So now he's finished. He's got two degrees. Has a bachelor's degree and two master's degrees. So now we'll see if he ever gets married. I have a feeling he probably won't. I'm not. It doesn't make any sense to me. I've always been married. It's one of those kind of deals. So it's a little confusing to me to stay engaged to somebody for over 10 years. He got engaged. They went up to Lake Tahoe, and it was on some promontory, and he bent down and proposed to her. Got down on one knee. So she's been wearing that diamond ring for a decade now. The sexual revolution was sparked by the invention of the birth control pill in 1964. So before 1964, the contraception was pretty iffy. Because the fear of pregnancy was removed, sexual morality changed, and the sexual revolution was the result. Because intercourse could be engaged without fear of pregnancy, people took longer and longer to decide to marry. And of course, this was right just after my era, or just before my era. Uh, Birth control pill was invented. I graduated from high school in 1967, and I got married in 1969. Now that's only 5 years, and the reality is that birth control pills in the beginning were kind of iffy themselves. They always kept you from getting pregnant. That wasn't the problem. But the question was, did it cause cancer, ovarian cancer, or uterine cancer, or breast cancer? The dosages of estrogen were so high that it was causing women to go blind. So once they did a better job of regulating the estrogen, they started using progesterone in the birth control pills. The birth control pills became more uh, reliable. Um, in other words, they didn't cause cancer. They were almost never allowed you to get pregnant. That wasn't the problem. The problem was would you have problems with it? Um, Now most young people had to have a series of sexual relationships before getting married, and premarital sexual relationships enjoys widespread tolerance. So when I was in high school, when I was in college from 67 through 71. Um, the None of this was a sure thing, and because of that, the sexual revolution didn't start until after I got out of college. But by that time, of course, I was married, and I had one child while I was in college, and then I had one child just after I joined the military. The women's movement morphed out of the civil rights and peace movements of the 1950s through the 1970s. The movement expanded the opportunities for young women, giving them options beyond marriage and homemaking. Colleges that had low percentages of women in the 1950s and 60s began bursting at the seams with larger and larger percentages of women. Now almost all occupations are open to women. I can't think of any that aren't. In the 1950s through the 19 in the 1970s, all of the all male colleges in the United States opened their doors to women, so they became co-ed. That included Yale, Princeton, Harvard, Notre Dame, what else did it? It included all the military academies. They opened their doors to women. The only two all-male colleges left in the United States. One small college in Indiana that I went to Wabash, and it's still all male. It only has 825 students. And the other is Hampton Sydney in Virginia, and it has about 1,000 students. So there are only two all-male colleges left in the United States. In the 1960s, before the women's movement started, about half of the colleges in the United States were all male, including all the Ivy League schools, except for Columbia. Columbia was co-ed, but all the others were. They had sister schools. Harvard had Vassar. Yale had, well, I can't think of it anyway. Anyway, they all had sister schools, which meant that there were women's colleges right beside them. Vassar is co-ed now, and that's where my cousins went. My female cousins went to Vassar. I have two female cousins that have degrees from Vassar. One of the interesting aspects of the 60s and 70s was the revolutionary youth movement that denigrated adulthood and exalted youth. In the 1950s, teenagers were eager to enter adulthood, so early marriage was very common. However, in today's world, adolescents and young adults see marriage and everything that comes with it, children and a home, as something to be avoided. These individuals are trying to delay such serious responsibility as long as possible. While in the 1950s, that was a mark of adulthood, was the fact that you're married and you have children. And like I said, people were graduating from high school and immediately getting married and going into the factory. And this is, of course, where I lived, that was very common. But this had been going on for 20 or 30 years since the end of World War II. People were graduating from high school and immediately getting married. Europe has the longest emerging adulthood time. The average age of marriage and parenthood are around 30. Asians aren't considered adults until they are capable of supporting their parents financially. This may curtail identity exploration seen in European countries. One of the interesting things about the Japanese, and I don't know, this has to do with sex, but I'm going to give you this information anyway. Please don't take this the wrong way. In Japan, they did a survey, and what they discovered was that it was, what was it, 25% of people over 30 had never had sex. So they delayed even having sex. Until they were in their 30s. And of course, in the United States, I think the percentage of people 30 and above who hadn't had sex was like 2%. So in Japan, it's much, much higher. This kind of, the Japanese are really kind of fascinating people. Um, a lot of their artwork seems to be pornographic as by our standards, by our American standards, they're relatively pornographic. But as far as they're concerned, that's just the way it is, and it's really kind of fascinating. There's a lot of things that have to do with sexuality and the Japanese that you would have a difficult time understanding because in the United States, of course, we are less. They're less sexually repressed, actually. They have nudity on television. It's really kind of fascinating. But this is just a really fascinating topic that we can't talk about in the United States because we're not supposed to talk about these things. But in Japan, of course, it's a little bit different. Developing countries tend to be split between urban and rural. Urban young people are more likely to experience emerging adulthood. Rural young people have fewer opportunities for schooling and exploring, and education itself in rural areas and developing countries are kind of iffy. Emerging adulthood is a period of peak physical functioning. The VO2 peaks in the early 20s. Reaction, grip strength, and bone density are at its peak. This is the time when the individual is the least susceptible to physical illness. Questionable lifestyle encourages poor nutrition, high stress, and a lack of sleep. And of course, what we're talking about is binge drinking and whatnot. Drinking itself is, of course, alcohol is a toxin. This individual's got a package of cigarettes in front of her. These are all negative things. Now, at this age, in your 20s, it really isn't going to make that much of an impact on you, probably because of all these factors right here. But the reality is, all this stuff, if you continue this into your 30s and 40s, of course, now we got a fairly serious problem. It starts cutting into the time of that that you will be able to live. College students more than twice as likely as college students are more than twice as likely to show symptoms of delayed sleep phase syndrome, sleeping longer on the weekends and holidays than through the week. This leads to poor academic and job performance. College students tend to accumulate a sleep debt that they try to recover from during any downtime, and that's usually on the weekends and during holidays. So if you have a college student that you send away to college and he comes back and he or she comes back, expect them to sleep a little bit more at your house than they probably do when they are wherever they are. Now you shouldn't be assuming that they are going out and getting drunk every night. Your assumption should be that these people are studying all the time. They've got a paper that's due tomorrow, so they're going to have to stay up and pull an all-nighter to finish the paper. It's usually that kind of a situation. Not all college students, or what we learned last time, what was a 56% drink in a really strange fashion. Well, that may be true, that 56%, but there's still 44% that are suffering from sleep phase syndrome as well. Two-thirds of students report sleep problems. One quarter report severe sleep disturbances such as insomnia. Eveningness versus morningness. Some emerging adults prefer early to bed and early to rise, while others have a more late to bed, late to rise pattern. These patterns tend to change with age due to growth hormones. You're really kind of curious. My wife, when she was in college, she never took a class before noon. I'm a morning person, so I took all my classes in the morning. So we're kind of opposites as far as that's concerned. She never took it, and she liked to sleep in, and I can't sleep in. I just can't do it. Anyway, so there you go. I'm an early to bed and early to rise person, and she's a late to bed, late to rise person. But now that we're married, of course, it's we're not in college anymore. Emerging adults are encouraged to maintain good sleep hygiene, wake up at the same time each day, get regular exercise, take late afternoon naps, limit caffeine intake, avoid excessive alcohol intake. I was talking to my brother a couple days ago, and he was saying that if he drinks coffee after, what did he say? Oh, he was complaining that my dad used to drink coffee with supper. And of course, we had supper any time between 6 and 8 o'clock. And he couldn't imagine that my dad was able to sleep. He thought that maybe he had insomnia. But my dad's not sensitive to caffeine, so he could drink caffeine anytime he wanted. I'm the same way. I can drink caffeine anytime I want, and I still sleep, go to sleep immediately when my head hits the pillow, pretty much. And I don't have any problem staying asleep. But he can't drink coffee after like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or he's up all night. He was saying this to me, and I was a little confused. Anyway, he's different. His genetic structure is more like my mom's, and my genetic structure is more like my dad's. In the United States, car fatalities are highest between the ages of 16 and 24. This is due to inexperience, the fact that people haven't been driving very long. The most dangerous time for a driver is the year after they receive their licenses because of their inexperience. Risky driving behavior, they tend to speed, drive under the influence. They follow too closely. They don't obey traffic signs and signals. They change lanes erratically. They pass it in opportune times. They allow too little time to merge. They fail to yield for pedestrians. This is especially true of male drivers. I can remember when I was living in Oklahoma, we had a really serious problem with kids in pickup trucks. They would, and you can start driving in Oklahoma at age 15. You don't really get your license until 16, but you have a learner's permit at 15. So these kids would all pile into the backs of these pickup trucks, and they would drive along the road, and they're just out to have a good time. But a lot of times they're driving too close, they're drunk, and these are the 15-year-olds. I mean, it was really kind of a serious situation. So anytime a pickup truck came up behind you in Oklahoma, you needed to be really careful as to what happened next. Sometimes they try to pass you at stupid times. Sometimes they try to force you off the road. I mean, it was really kind of bizarre. You you needed to make sure those people were going to pass you. A lot. Sometimes when they started to pass, as soon as they got out in the other lane, I would slow down so that they were already past me. And I mean, it was that bad. It was really, really bad. There were other problems I had in Oklahoma. We won't go into that. But it was the kids. It was really, really serious stuff, especially on the weekends. What these kids were doing, they would all uh, decide where they were going to have their beer bash this weekend. And somebody would take kegs out there. You know, sometimes it was older guys, sometimes it was just high school kids. But I mean, they had junior high kids out there, and of course they would borrow their father's station wagon or their truck or whatever. And these kids are driving around at age 12. They're somewhat inebriated. These field parties would go on all weekend. They'd start Friday night, sometimes Thursday night, and go all the way to Monday, sometimes Tuesday. So Mondays were really kind of interesting, and Fridays were sometimes kind of interesting. When I was teaching in Oklahoma, I was more than a little shocked, and of course they thought they were cool. And I'm in my what was I in Oklahoma? I was in my 40s, and so I'm thinking, you guys really don't need to do this. You need to grow up a little bit. Nearly half of United States college students admit to having driven intoxicated in the past year. Half. Young drivers are less likely to wear seat belts. Drivers not wearing seat belts are twice as likely to die if they're in an automobile accident. They are 3 times more likely to be injured. Socialization impacts the number of accidents. The more friends in the car, the more likely the driver will have an accident. Personality characteristics can promote high risk driving. Some people are sensation seekers. Some people are aggressive drivers. Reducing fatalities includes parental involvement and monitoring. And of course, this is something that wasn't happening in Oklahoma when we were out, when I was living there. I was there from 1990 until 1994. Graduated driver's licensing is also effective. Complete freedom is not awarded until the individual has a clean record for a number of years. In some states, if a driver under the age of 21 has a DUI, they lose their license immediately. There are other interesting laws that states have passed trying to keep these kids from killing themselves. Rates of fatal car fatalities by age And as you can see, for males, look at that. For males, it's between 16 and 24. Wow, that's really high. Females are a little bit smarter. No, they're a lot smarter than males. Males are just aggressive. They have all that testosterone splashing through their system, so they just need to grow up. 21st birthday parties can be painful. Some people take their very first legal drink at age 21 and may drink to excess. The day may pass in a haze of alcohol to be followed by a day of hangover. Drinking may not hold the same attraction after this since legal doesn't have the same titillation as illegal. So illegal drinking before they turn 21 is kind of exciting for people. I have no idea how old these kids are, but anyway, they're at a bar and they're drinking. Isn't that cool? my my brother, I didn't have to go through this because I got married at age 19 and I had a kid. I needed to be responsible. But my brother didn't have a child at 21. So what he did when he turned 21, this is weird. At the time, Ohio had a legal drinking age of 18. So people from Indiana, we weren't that far away from the Ohio border, less than 100 miles. So people would go over to Ohio to drink. And you could do that. It was 3-2 beer, but you could still, if you drank enough of them, you could get drunk. Anyway, so my brother, when he turned 21, what did he do? Did he go down to the local bar and get a drink? No. What he did was he got in his car and he went over to Ohio, where the legal drinking age was still 18, and he drank over in Ohio. It was really kind of a silly thing to do. My brother's kind of an interesting person anyway, but he drank legally, double legally, I guess. He could have gone over there when he was 19 if he wanted to drink in Ohio. Anyway, interesting things. For most people, adulthood means accepting responsibilities that adults must face, such as marriage, raising a family, providing for the family through work. This is known as role transition, accepting the duties and responsibilities of an adult. And as I told you before, this all started for me when I was 19 years old. Marriage, raising a family, and I worked. I worked a lot. I worked while I was in college. I worked during the summer. I worked during Christmas holidays. I worked in order to buy food for my family. Substance abuse peaks in the early 20s. Peak and decline is possibly explained by unstructured socializing. College-age students have more unstructured time, causing peak drinking. This also may be the first time the individual has had any time to themselves. Role transition causes decline in substance abuse. Of course, the role transition we're talking about is getting married and having a family and having to take care of that family. You just don't have the money anymore to mess around and take your drugs. Marijuana use and binge drinking in emerging adulthood, as you can see, it peaks. What are we doing? Binge drinking. This is binge drinking. Marijuana smoking, 2021. Oh, here we go, 18. Yeah. So this is when it all happens. It's drinking and toking. Toking is what we used to call smoking marijuana. This is all kind of adolescent stuff that people do. Adults doing it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, since you need to take care of your family, and you certainly shouldn't be spending all of your money on fun stuff for you. You need to save your money to buy a birthday present for your daughter or whatever. Drinking alcohol, about 63% of the people in the United States drink regularly. 63%, that means 37% don't drink at all. Drinking in most industrialized countries has been declining over the past 2 decades because of the expense of alcohol and tougher drinking laws. And that's one of the ways they decreased drinking is by raising the taxes on alcohol. That's the way they. I think cigarettes are what, $5 or $6 a pack now. When I was in the service, I could buy a whole carton of cigarettes. That's 20 packs. That's 400 cigarettes for about $5. But that was when I was in the military, back in the 70s. As long as a person doesn't drink and drive, 2 glasses of wine or one beer makes them less likely to have a stroke. Binge drinking is defined as consuming 5 or more drinks in a row. In most cases, drinking that much alcohol in a short period of time will get the individual quite drunk. Several antisocial behaviors are associated with binge drinking, including rape, assault, drunk driving, domestic abuse. And of course, people who drink always look cool. It's the coolest thing in the world. Here are some of the coolest people I've ever seen. Nothing like passing out under a public toilet, certain to get urine all over you, or what, or vomit maybe. You never know. I never noticed this. I thought this was 2 different pictures. It's 2 guys drunk and sleeping on. One's under the bench and one's on top of the bench. I've never really seen that before. Oh, there we go. He's taking his shoes off. At least he's comfortable. There we go. And that guy busted his chair. Okay, this is a little bit obscene, but you get the message. Night out with the gang, $30. Rounds of $1.99 shooter specials, $40. Self experiment with date rape drug Rohypnol, $10. Forgetting that you're pissed drunk laying spread eagle on the sidewalk in front of the bar and not in bed with your lover, priceless. And of course, she's drunk. 1 in 13 adults abuses alcohol or are alcoholic. Alcohol dependence is a combination of several chemicals in the brain that causes the individual to crave alcohol. GABA inhibits impulsiveness. Glutamate excites the nervous system. Norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, opioid peptides. These are all things that are induced by alcohol. These are the neurotransmitters. Long-term drinking can deplete or increase levels of these chemicals in the brain so that the individual craves the substance. And of course, this is a public toilet and she's passed out. Pretty close. Maybe she's not passed out. And this is an amazing picture. I have no idea how he ever got into that position. This is from Romania. That's the RO right here. But somehow he squeezed into the wheel, the seat well. I don't know how he did it. That's amazing. Researchers have determined that as people age, they develop the ability to use better and better judgment. This is known as post-formal thought. Truth may vary from situation to situation. Solutions must be realistic to be reasonable. Ambiguity and contradiction are the rule rather than the exception. Emotion and subjective factors usually play a role in thinking, and these are all ideas of post-formal thought. Part of post-formal thought is the development of reflective judgment, or the ability to reason through dilemmas dealing with current affairs, religion, science, personal relationships, and other daily factors. Reflective judgment is not automatic, and it takes decades to develop, and that's one of the things you need to think about. One of the reasons you're educating yourself is because you're developing reflective judgment. A lot of individuals, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of people have a problem with what's been going on politically in the United States. A lot of the things that have happened don't seem to be very logical. For people with reflective judgment, it makes no sense whatsoever. And the reason is because not everybody develops reflective judgment. Not everybody tries to educate themselves. A lot of people are just accepting of thoughts that other people have, and they don't reason them out. So that's one of the reasons why you go to college, to develop critical thinking skills, and that of course develops reflective judgment. The first three stages in the reflective judgment model represent pre-reflective thought. In these stages, the individual does not perceive that their perception could possibly be inaccurate. These individuals have a hard time understanding that some problems do not have cut and dried answers. Not everything in the world is black and white. If you think it is, then you're not thinking deeply enough. Oh, okay. You're not thinking deeply enough. In stages 4 and 5, the individual acknowledges that not all situations have conditions that can be totally known. Solutions must be based on situations and evidence. Knowledge is seen as subjective. As the individual moves into stages 6 and 7, they realize that knowledge is constructed from evidence and argument after careful analysis of the problem or situation. Reflective judgment is only possible through continual reevaluation of beliefs and new evidence. And of course, the new evidence should be coming in all the time. Now, if you're going to study psychology, I need to warn you right now, psychology is somewhat abstract. The reality is that there are no absolutes in psychology. I can't tell you something today that will always be true and will be true for everybody. Love, religion, all of these things are fairly abstract, and they're fairly gray. There is no black and white as far as psychology is concerned. But that's part of the fun of psychology, because psychology changes on a relatively frequent basis. Every time something changes in society, psychology will change. What Freud thought was the way it was isn't the way it is anymore. The way that Erickson thought that the world was isn't the same anymore. I just read an article dealing with birth order. Once upon a time, birth order was really important in the United States. If you were the firstborn, you were this. If you were a middle child, you were this. If you were the baby of the family, you had different personality traits. It said this isn't true anymore. But the reason it's not true anymore, one of the reasons it's not true anymore, is because people aren't having 3 kids, or 4 kids, or 6 kids, or 9 kids, like they were back in the 50s and 60s when this theory was first developed. It was true for then. It's not true for now, because we're having much smaller families than we used to have. It's really kind of fascinating. So that's the way psychology is. As society changes, psychology changes. That's why we're working on the DSM-5. That's why we're not just working with the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that psychologists use. If all of this stuff was like physics, gravity is always like this, acceleration is always this. If it were like mathematics, 1 plus 1 always equals 2, 2 plus 2 always equals 4, then we could write just a DSM, and that would be the way it is. But psychology is a soft science. It's a continually changing science. And one of the exciting things, and the reason I say it's exciting, is because it's up to me and it's up to you to decide what is true or not. What may have been causing people to act erratically in 1950 is not something that's going to make them act erratically now. I can remember I just did a lecture where I was talking about telephone addiction, cell phone addiction, and or email addiction. And I said, if you check your email more than once a day, then you may be a computer addict. Well, the reality is, you guys probably check your email constantly. I don't, because I always have it on my computer. But I can assure you, every time I turn my computer on, I check my email. So I may be an email addict. I'm not, because that's how society has changed. So it's really kind of exciting. psychology is kind of exciting, and it's up to you guys get to decide what is real and what isn't real, what has changed and what hasn't changed. That's why psychology is exciting, and that's why business is boring. Business changes too, but I'm not sure about their ethics. Training beyond secondary school is called tertiary education. Around World War I, less than 10% of the population in any country obtained tertiary education. Less than 10%. Until the 1970s, most of the people seeking tertiary education was men. Because of religious beliefs, women were considered cognitively and emotionally inferior to men. And this is one of the reasons why we had finishing schools instead of graduate schools for women. Tertiary education, this was back in the 70s. Things have changed. I told you before, I think I told you before, the argument, I started studying psychology in the 1970s, middle 1970s. And the argument at that time was, should women work outside the home? This was the big argument in psychology. Of course, that's not an argument anymore. It's hardly ever questioned, unless you're a Republican senator, I guess. Tertiary education has become a normative experience with women outnumbering men now at a rate of about 65% to 35%. So even Dene College has about 65% women and 35% men. If you go to any co-ed college in the United States, and like I said, there are only two all-male colleges in the United States, but there's probably 2 or 3 dozen all women's colleges in the United States. But if you go to any co-ed school, just about any co-ed school in the United States, it's about 65-35%, 65 to 35. Worldwide, tertiary school gross enrollment ratios, as you can see, the United States, Russia, Spain, strangely enough, Australia, this is Argentina, that's Colombia. Canada has somewhere between 50 and 75%. United States has 75%. This is Eastern Europe. That's the Ukraine, and that is Belarus, I think. That is Poland. Yeah, that's Poland. That white one right there. Anyway, okay, so in Europe, it's not that common. It's somewhere between 50 and 75%, same way in Canada. But the rest of the world, as you can see, not so much education. Not so much tertiary education. Countries vary widely in how they structure tertiary education. Japan is relaxed and undemanding in university years. It is 4 years of sanctioned activities to think. After the highly competitive middle school and high school years, this will probably be the only time in their lives when they are encouraged to be leisurely. So in Japan, it's a time for rest, going to university. European colleges have no general education requirements. If you study psychology, you start as a freshman. You don't have to, there's no gen eds. It's not a liberal arts education. Liberal arts education is something that we do in the United States. Traditionally, they spend 6+ years in a specific discipline only. That's all they study. Currently, the European colleges are changing to match U.S. patterns. More gen eds, more liberal arts education. U.S. and Canada supports the first 2 years of general education for exploration. Many Americans will take 6 years to earn a 4-year degree, yet only 57% will finish their degree even in 6 years. Major reasons for the delay in finishing their education: they change majors a lot, they add a minor, they take advantage of internships, they take advantage of studying abroad, they may have financial constraints. Tuition has increased by a factor of 4 since 1982. When I was at Wabash College in the early 1960s or late 1960s, sorry, my tuition was about $1,200 a year. Now it's $12,000 a year. So 10 times. It's gone up by a factor of 10 since the 60s. Financial aid has shifted from grants to loans. Societies benefit from having an educated population because it allows for economic growth in a world economy. The individual benefits through higher earnings and occupational status, verbal and quantitative skills. It increases your verbal and quantitative skills. Oral and written communication is better. Distinct identity as a college graduate. Social confidence, of course. Increased self-concept and psychological well-being. College bonus following and economic benefits of tertiary education. What are we talking? Oh, talking about amounts of money. Bachelor's degree, above $45,000. 2-year degree, above $30,000. High school diploma, about $28,000. And of course, the unemployment rates go markedly down the more education you have. For some of the job search is systematic and changing. For others, the job search is more meandering and without focus. After tertiary education, many struggle to find work that pays enough to live on. Without tertiary education, basic skills are needed to obtain employment. 6 basic skills are necessary for new jobs. Reading at a 9th grade level or higher, doing math at a 9th grade level or higher, solving semi-structured problems, communicating orally and in writing, using a computer for word processing and other tasks, collaborating in diverse groups. You may not even understand what this term means. Word processing is just typing things, is typing documents. That's what word processing is. And the reason we talk about word processing is that because before we had home computers, before they were very common, they had word processors. Word processors was like typing on a computer. You could change things, you could move things around. If you type on a typewriter, of course, once you hit the key, it's there on the on the page, and the only way you can get rid of it is to erase it with an eraser. But in word processing, of course, it's just like writing something on a computer. So that's what word processing is. It's a lot easier to write a book if you're writing using a word processor than if you're typing. I'm reading a book now called Raintree County. It was written in 1948, and the guy that wrote it typed it out in about 6 months, about 600,000 words in 6 months. And of course, he did it on a typewriter because there was no word processing back then. But he would type and make corrections on his page, and then he would give it to his wife, and she would type up the final copy. So both of them are typing away, but every time they made a mistake, they either had to cross it out and just put what they wanted, or they had to go back and retype the whole page again. I mean, that's the way it used to be. So be happy that we have word processing and computers these days. I'm especially happy because I'm a poor speller. I can correct your spelling, but I can't correct my own spelling. So I'm really happy when the computer tells me I've misspelled a word. So now you know the reasons why there are so many misspelled words in your lecture. Unemployment rates are twice as high for emerging adults as for adults beyond the age of 25. Unemployment for young adults and teens is especially high, as they are for minorities. Over half the high school dropouts are unemployed. Manufacturing jobs have diminished. Urban decline also impacted the rise in unemployment. Self-esteem increases with emerging adults. Awkwardness of physical appearance declines because their appearance becomes more stable. Peer evaluations from high school are less likely as people get away from the high school social milieu. In other words, all that social crap that was going on in high school, well, you're not there anymore. And so you don't really have to go by, all the bullies and all the social strangeness that was going on when you were in high school. Family relationships tend to improve. There's a greater degree of control over one's life. Erickson, this is a time of identity versus identity confusion, cliquishness and intolerance of differences, both hallmarks of adolescent social scene, are defenses against identity confusion. Individuals need a stable identity before reaching intimacy, and this may explain prolonged cohabitation and less frequent marriages. So they're not exactly sure if this is who they want to be. I married my first wife. She was 18 at the time. Probably a mistake because her identity wasn't set yet. This was in 1969, in the late 60s. This was a time when there was a lot of social upheaval going on. There was an anti-war movement in the United States. The civil rights movement was going on. The hippies were starting to become a social entity. And of course, she was in that 18-year-old, I don't know what I want to be for the rest of my life situation. And of course, we had a child fairly quickly after we got married. So here she was. She was saddled down with a child. She didn't know who she was. She was more like this than she was like this. And that's one of the reasons why our marriage didn't last for very long, despite the fact we were married for about 4.5 years. But we were probably only happy for 3 of those years. The last year and a half was pretty rugged. But it was because she didn't know who she wanted to be. And eventually she decided she wanted to be cool rather than be a mother and a wife. So she ran off with somebody. I don't really blame her. She never had uh, she was never an 18-year-old. She was never a 19-year-old. She became a mother fairly quickly, and it was as much my fault as it was hers, certainly. And she left her kids, but at the same time, she was still a kid herself. Identity formation historically has been thought to occur in adolescence. However, emerging adulthood is the time period of importance for identity formation. The key areas to form identities are love, work, and ideology. And the odd thing is, of course, she didn't love me, or she fell out of love with me. She decided she wanted to work, and her ideology, my ideology, was fairly liberal. Hers became extremely conservative. So, I mean, if the two of us were anywhere close to each other today, we wouldn't agree on anything. Three elements of identity development: assessing abilities and strengths, identification that have accumulated by modeling, assess opportunities available to them in society. And of course, everybody is trying things on as they go through high school, the self-exploration that they talk about. This has to take place. It takes place in high school and college. Really kind of fascinating. Of course, I was in a traditional situation. Traditional educational situation is where you graduate from high school and you go right into college. So the people, when we got back together, the people in high school, and they all came back for a kind of reunion after 2 or 3 years in college. Everybody was completely different. It was nothing like in high school, except for the kids that didn't go to college. They didn't have an opportunity to change. They weren't forced to change, and they acted like high school kids, and we thought they were immature, as weird as that is. But the college kids, the kids who had gone away to college, they had changed completely. The way that they acted was completely different. Marcia classified adolescence into one of four identity statuses: either diffusion, moratorium, foreclosure, or achievement. And I hope I'm going to explain that. No, I'm not. Okay. What she's talking about is whether you have understand who you are. That's achievement. If you're in foreclosure, you know who you want to be, and you're trying to become that person. Moratorium is where nothing's you haven't decided yet. You may not even be looking, and then diffusion is where you haven't started looking yet to figure out who you want to be. Culture influences identity. Many cultures view the self as interdependent in relation to others rather than independent. Exploration to establish, and this is especially interdependency is especially true in high school. If you think about it, you're trying to get along with everybody in your high school. There's cliques. You're trying to um, figure out who you are and what's going on. So we're pretty fairly interdependent. By the time you get into college and you flip that 20-year switch, by this time you better have figured out what you want to be. Now you can be independent. Now you can get married and have a family and get a job because this is the person that you want to be. I was looking at a group of pictures of triplets. I don't ask me why I was looking at it, but they were talking. These triplets had taken the same picture every year for a number of years, and it was really kind of interesting watching them. You know, when they're 1 year old and 2 years old and 5 years old and 7 years old, and then they get into high school. It's really kind of fascinating because their hair got long, and then they went to college. And about the time that they graduated from college, and this was in Germany, so their education was six years long. So by the time they got out of college, all of a sudden they cut their hair. Their hair was shorter. One kid had a really wild haircut, and finally he cut his hair to look like somebody who was an adult. But it was really kind of interesting to watch the change of hairdos over the years. When they were in high school, they were fairly rebellious. Went into college and they were kind of scruffy, and then as soon as they graduated from college and started working, all of a sudden the scruffiness was gone and the hair was cut in a reasonable manner. Exploration to establish identity is not possible in some cultures where choices are limited by economic and strict traditions. More may be limited by economy. Marriage and dating may be limited by traditional parents and arranged marriages. And of course, that would be someplace where they actually arrange marriages, Africa, India, and whatnot. Exploration of ideology occurs more in Western countries, whereas other cultures do not tolerate such independent thought. Globalization impacts development of bicultural identity, their local culture, of course, and global or hybrid identity and culture. And this is kind of what happened to me. I grew up in Delaware County, Indiana, and when I went away to college, I went away to college in on the other side of the state. Uh, we were Muncie's in the east, and Crawfordsville is in the west. So being away from the local culture was huge, was fairly massive. But not only that, but the people I was going to college with, these were all people from all over the world. I had a friend that was Greek, Yanis Petros Roubatis, uh, who, strangely enough, is is right now he's what 73 years old, but he is in charge of security in Greece right now. So he's a very important person. He's kind of like the CIA head of the CIA in Greece. Anyway, so I became more of a global person. Once I went into the military, I hardly ever saw anybody from Indiana, let alone from Muncie. So my identity became so much more global. I married a woman from Georgia, divorced her and married another woman from Georgia. So my outlook has become far more global because I went away to college and joined the military. And of course, I've lived in Japan and Germany and all over the United States. Uh, so just talking to my brother, who stayed home almost his whole life, is really kind of interesting because his scope is local and my scope is global. So it changes things. The books that he reads are different from the books that I read. Identity is more complex if the individual is a member of an ethnic minority group. As adolescents move into adulthood, they become more and more aware of their ethnic identity. Minority adults are forced into a dual identity, their minority status and majority status, such as African American, French Canadian, Turkish, Dutch. Four ways of responding to ethnic awareness. One is assimilation, adopting the ways of the majority culture. This is what was forced on the immigrants coming into the United States, especially at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. 60% of all the people that have immigrated to the United States came in at that time, between 1880 and 1920. So, how in the world did we make them Americans? Well, what the government decided that they would do, they decided that they would educate them. They would force them to become Americans by educating their young people. And so that's when American education became so full of propaganda dealing with the United States. That's when they came up with the Pledge of Allegiance. It came out in the 1890s. All of these myths about the United States came out. And strangely, it's not that strange. This is when the boarding schools started for the American Indians. What were they trying to do? They were trying to force American Indians to become Americans, good Americans. Why were through assimilation? They were trying to force assimilation on the American Indian tribes, and that's one of the reasons why the boarding schools were so oppressive. Was because they were trying to they wanted you to look like an American and act like an American and repeat all of the propaganda that Americans repeat. Pledge of Allegiance, be able to sing the Star Spangled Banner, be able to march like good American soldiers and whatnot. But assimilation ended. Actually, assimilation has been going on especially with immigrants in the United States. This is how do you become a citizen of the United States? You learn all the propaganda, uh, and then you can become a good American citizen. This didn't end until the 1970s, and of course the boarding schools started closing in the 1970s. Marginality, rejecting both your culture and that of the majority culture. We see this sometimes, especially today, with people of different religious backgrounds than the majority culture in the United States. Where they reject their own culture, they also reject the majority culture. Separation, interacting only with your own ethnic group. And of course, this is what was going on before the 1880s, before the huge influx of immigrants. There was Greek town and Chinatown and Italian town and whatever, Greek town, whatever. Separation, that's what we were just talking about. And then biculturalism, developing dual identity. And that's what most immigrants have been able to do. Ideas about gender have become more egalitarian in the United States during the 21st century. However, gender stereotypes still exist, especially with regard to work. Women's work is more likely to be rated less favorable than men's, even by other women. And of course, all girls are princesses and all boys are he-men. Of course, He-Man used to be a cartoon from the 1990s. Smith and Snell in 2010, 1980s, 1920s, 1980s, 1990s. Smith and Snell in 2010 found that among emerging adults, religious beliefs were stronger than behavior. 44% reported that belief was important in their lives. Religious doctrine is not as important as a belief in God. 75% reported believing in God. More tolerant of religious, we are more tolerant today than we of religious differences than we have been in the past. Religious beliefs related to higher well-being and lower high-risk behaviors, which is true. Like I said, I'm reading a book called Raintree County, and I've talked about this before. I grew up in a town that was Methodist. That's where I went to school. Not That's the way it was back in those days. Um, every little town was either Baptist or Catholic or Methodist or Episcopalian or whatever. But that's the way it used to be. Now, of course, most towns aren't a specific religion. But once upon a time, that's the way it was. Um, when I lived in Omaha, it was 80% Catholic. I didn't actually live in Omaha. I lived outside of Omaha, but uh, I was coaching. I was coaching soccer, high school soccer, and so a lot of the teams I had to play were Catholic high schools. According to Smith and Snell in 2010, emerging adults tend to have a more individualized approach to religion. Four major categories: agnostics or atheists. 40% most are complacent, though there are some who are strongly anti-religious. So about 40% of the people in the United States are agnostic or atheist. Atheists believe that there is no God. Agnostics are still a question whether there is a God or not. Deists, about 15% believe that there is something out there. These people are called deists. Oddly enough, George Washington, a lot of the early founders were deists. They believed in God. They believed that there was something out there, but it wasn't something specific, and that's what deism is. Liberal believers, 30% liberally accept and ignore what they want from their faith. And then the conservative believers only represent about 15% who hold strong traditional beliefs. That's the statistics now. Of course, in the past, what did I just say? 75% believe that there is a God. Well, that's 40% are agnostics or atheists. I guess some of the agnostics are believing that there is a God. In the United States, participation in conventional politics is low until the last election. In the last election, we had more people that voted than we have ever had. A higher percentage of individuals voted. Um, so just over the last 10 or 15 years, voting has increased. Involvement in political parties has increased. Volunteer work and political demonstration is high. High involvement in political extremes. It increases in political extremes impacted by fewer social ties and obligations to other age periods. Increased involvement could also be identity related. So we have a lot of young people that are identifying with a political structure. In the United States, most children leave home at about 18 or 19 to 19 years of age. Common reasons for leaving: they leave to go to college, they leave to move in with a significant other, or just to move out to be independent. Increased quality of parental interaction occurs after leaving home. Now contact, of course, is voluntary, so it's a little bit easier. Before they had to interact with their parents. Now it's voluntary that they interact with their parents. Ethnic minorities tend to stay at home longer. 40% of all emerging adults will return to the nest at least once. A trend that social scientists have been seeing in the last couple of decades is the young adult who graduates from college and moves back in with their parents before resolving Erikson's intimacy versus isolation dilemma. These individuals are referred to as thresholders or incompletely launched young adults. incompletely launched young adults, or thresholders. There are four patterns for young adults leaving home. In-time leavers left before turning 25, about 55% did that. The average male moves out at age 23. The average female moves out at about age 21. Still in the nesters are people who are actively trying to move out and will be out by 25. That's about 14%. Late leavers are still living at home at 25. That's about 20%. And returners are children that develop an independent life and then return to their birth home. That's about 11%. The European emerging adults stay at home longer than in the United States. European emerging adults value mutual support of their family. It affords them a higher standard of living, staying at home. Parental understanding increases in emerging adults. Intimacy grows in importance as people pass from adolescence to adulthood. Emerging adults have fewer friends, but those they do have, there is more self-disclosure, though fewer shared activities. There is increased time in unstructured activities. There is a decline in leisure activities as people age. Once upon not a very long time ago, it was taboo to talk about sex. Sex was so feared that when Lucy was pregnant with little Ricky, the word pregnant could not be used, and this was in the early 50s. So we didn't find out that she was pregnant. They didn't say she was pregnant. They said that she was with child. In the early sitcoms, when they showed the bedroom of the parents, they slept in twin beds, not in a double bed. Even Rob and Laura Petrie slept in separate beds, as you can see. And this is Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. Desi Arnaz, actually, and Lucille Ball. And Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore. Dick Van Dyke's still alive, but on his television show, it was the Dick Van Dyke Show. It was he and his wife slept in separate beds, as did Lucy and Ricky. Sex is more accepted in today's society. In today's society, premarital sex is expected, non-marital sex is common, and casual sex is touted as perfectly acceptable behavior. The old double standard, where males were allowed more sexual freedom than females, is now passé. So females can have just as many sexual partners as males can. Research has shown that sexual mores in the United States have changed a great deal. In one study showed that of individuals born before 1910, 61% of the men, but only 12% of the women, had had premarital sex. By the 1980s, the ratio was almost even for males and females, but as the hippie generation ages, sexual attitudes of the older generation seems to be liberalizing. Sexual orientation, there are four basic forms of sexual orientation. There's heterosexual orientation, attracted to members of the opposite sex. Homosexual, attracted to members of the same sex. Bisexual, attracted to members of both sex. And a new sexual orientation is asexuality, not especially attracted to anyone. This is fairly new. We've only started talking about asexuality over the last decade or so. Before that, you never talked about asexuality. You very rarely talked about bisexuality. Sexual orientation represents feelings and self-concept. They may or may not be expressed in behavior. So sexual orientation, you don't have to have sex with the opposite sex in order to be heterosexual. It's just an idea. It's a self-concept. Same way with homosexuality, same way with bisexuality, same way with asexuality. While homosexuality has been around since the dawn of man, and that is the reality, it was considered a mental illness until the DSM-3, and that was about 50 years ago. So if you read the DSM-2 or the DSM when it originally came out, they considered homosexuality a mental illness. Freud used to try to treat homosexuality. in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And according to him, it was the hardest thing to treat, and the reason it was so hard to treat was because he couldn't cure it. So he couldn't change somebody's sexual orientation. Homosexuality has been acceptable in more countries than it has been rejected, and in one ancient Western society, ancient Greece, it was the accepted norm. So in ancient Greece, if you were wealthy enough, you not only had a wife, but you would also have a boyfriend, and that was accepted behavior. Incidence of homosexuality seems to be about the same in all cultures. In the United States, about 2.8% of males and 1.4% of females identify themselves as homosexual. Homosexual encounters do not make someone gay. 5% of males and 4% of females report adult homosexual encounters in their lifetime. People in large cities report more homosexual encounters for males, about 9%, but only about 3% for women. Sexual orientation emerges for most people in early adolescence without any prior sexual experience. For this reason, psychologists do not consider sexual orientation a conscious choice that can be changed. Biology may play an important role in sexual orientation. Research shows looking at homosexuality and sibling connections, the closer the genetic connection, the more likely a similar orientation. Some research indicates that male homosexuality may run in families. One of the residual benefits of the sexual revolution has been the acceptance of being single. 60% of women and 80% of men between 20 and 24 are not married. 5% of women and 4% of men never marry in their lifetimes. Reasons include freedom in movement and sexuality, fear of divorce, and joy in being alone. Internet use is higher among emerging adults than any other group. Emerging adults spend an average of 3.5 hours a day on the internet. It's used for college work, of course. A study in the UK found that the number of hours online negatively correlated with their grades. So if you're online to do schoolwork, that's okay. If you're playing video games or you're addicted to checking out your email or whatever, then it negatively affects your grades. Social networking presentation issues can become controversial. Identity play can be common. My grandson, I was surprised. I was watching him play Fortnite. He loves for people to watch him play Fortnite. I'd never figured that one out. But the last time I was there, he was a female character, and I was thinking, okay, uh, what's going? This is a little interesting. Evidently, he has 40 different skins, and 3 of them are female. And for some reason, this day he was a female character. I can't say much for his female characters. Um, uh, they are fairly chesty, and they wear really short skirts. They look like cheerleader skirts. So it's really kind of weird. It's not like their skirt comes flying up or anything. They're just running, around and they have these short skirts on. I'm not exactly sure. This is something that we're going to have to think about over the next, 5 or 10 years until all this stuff changes. But does this mean he wants to be a woman? Does this mean that he likes to look at women? I don't know. I guess we'll find out when he develops a sexual orientation. It's really kind of fascinating, though. I didn't expect him to have a female character. Pornography, the number one use of the internet is for pornography. In a study of college students, 87% of the males and 31% of the females reported viewing internet pornography. That's a lot. Mobile phones, social networking, and communicating with friends, text messaging, increasing use of staying in contact with the family and friends. Of course, that's the excuse. Sometimes I forget my cell phone. I know that's a sin in today's society, but sometimes I just forget it. And I don't feel any deficit. I don't run back home to get my phone. But then again, I'm 72 years old, so my mindset is very much different than yours. And that is the end of the chapter. So I'm sorry it took a while. It's kind of a fun chapter. I guess all the chapters after this are kind of fun. No, I think there's 13, maybe there's 12. I don't know. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next time. Don't forget, write your paper on anything you want. There is the due date is the beginning of April. If don't worry about if you don't get it done by the beginning of April, you can turn it in anytime. It has to be in by May because I have to be able to grade it. One thing I need to tell you though, I count lines, okay? I expect 5 pages of text. So if it's less than 5 pages of text, you will lose points. So that's 23 lines per page. 23 times 5 is 115, I think. Yeah, yeah, 115. Anyway, 115 lines. That doesn't include the title page, and that also doesn't include the reference page. You need 5, count them, 5. You need 5 references, and they should be pretty good references. And it has to be in the APA format. I know some of you are finding the citation, which is fine, but a lot of times the citations are not in APA format. They're in AMA format. They're in Turabian or the business format. Anyway, APA format. APA format is all the authors, the date that it was published, the title, the name of the journal that it's in, the volume number, and the issue number, and then the page numbers and the DOI number. That's it. A lot of times they'll do it for you if you go onto a good site. They will give you all this information. Don't be sucked into using the wrong format. APA is very specific, and it's that way. It's author, date, title of the article, title of the journal, volume number and issue number, page numbers, inclusive page numbers, and then the DOI number. Okay. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next week.